The sound of a metal bucket crashing against concrete echoed through the mess hall like a gunshot. "Watch where you're going, trash lady!" Staff Sergeant Brick Lawson stood towering over the small woman he had just shoved to the ground, hands planted on his hips, a sneer carved into his square jaw. Dirty water spread across the floor, seeping into the knees of her pale blue custodial uniform. 500 pairs of eyes in the most crowded mess hall at Camp Pendleton turned toward them. Not a single voice rose in protest. Amber, according to the name stitched on her badge, slowly pushed herself up from the wet floor. No complaint escaped her lips, no resentment flickered in her eyes. She simply retrieved her mop, gripping it with a steadiness that seemed almost instinctive, her hand finding the exact balance point where the weight distributed evenly, the same position anyone who had ever held a rifle would recognize. "Nothing to say, huh?" Lawson stepped forward, his combat boot splashing deliberately into the puddle. "Good. Know your place." A few Marines at the nearest tables laughed, their amusement rippling outward like a disease. From the officer's table near the window, Gunnery Sergeant Derek Thornton nodded his approval, a slight smile playing at the corner of his thin lips. But there was something no one noticed. As Amber bent to retrieve her rag, her sleeve rode up her forearm, revealing a scar, long, straight, surgical, running from her wrist to her elbow. Not the kind of scar from an accident. This was the mark of someone who had titanium plates installed after severe combat trauma. And in the back pocket of her uniform pants, barely visible, the corner of something metallic glinted bronze in the fluorescent light. A challenge coin. No one saw it, not yet. But in the next 20 minutes, Staff Sergeant Brick Lawson would wish he had never set foot in this mess hall. And his 12-year career would end, not in glory, but in complete humiliation. The noon sun blazed through the high windows of the mess hall, casting long rectangles of light across the institutional tile floor. Amber continued mopping as if nothing had happened, her strokes methodical, unhurried. The wet tracks she left behind glistened briefly before evaporating in the California heat that leaked through the glass. Around her, the lunch rush continued, the clatter of trays, the scrape of chairs, the constant hum of conversation. 500 Marines eating, talking, existing in their own world where a cleaning woman was barely more visible than the furniture she maintained. This was how it had always been. This was how they expected it to remain. Corporal Heather Walsh leaned toward the three women at her table, her voice carrying just far enough to reach Amber's ears. "Did you hear about her? The new cleaning lady?" She tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear, her eyes tracking Amber's movements with predatory interest. "Word is she got fired from her last base. Caught stealing from the PX." The women around her exchanged glances, a mixture of curiosity and disdain coloring their expressions. "Figures," one of them muttered. "Look at her. Probably needed the money for whatever hole she crawled out of." Walsh smiled, satisfied with the seed she had planted. Rumors spread faster than wildfire on a military base, and she had just lit the match. Amber gave no indication she had heard. She moved to a table near the far wall, positioning herself beside the window, a spot that offered a 270-degree view of the entire room. Her back was never fully exposed. Her eyes swept the space in a pattern that seemed almost unconscious, cataloging exits, counting bodies, assessing threats. A behavioral tick, nothing more than an old habit. The kind of habit that kept you alive in places where lunch came with the possibility of incoming fire. If you're already feeling that satisfying anger building up inside you, knowing this arrogant Marine has no idea what's coming, then you're exactly where you need to be. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell right now, because what Staff Sergeant Lawson is about to discover will make every second of waiting worth it. Trust me, you don't want to miss the moment his world comes crashing down. At the officer's table, a young woman in lieutenant's bars pushed back her chair and stood. Lieutenant Fiona Bradley was 26 years old, fresh out of officer candidate school, with idealism still burning bright in her chest despite the military's best efforts to extinguish it. She crossed the room with purposeful strides, stopping directly in front of Lawson, who was now entertaining his entourage with an embellished retelling of how the cleaning lady had practically kissed the floor. "Staff Sergeant," Bradley said, her voice cutting through his narrative, "that was unnecessary." Lawson turned slowly, his amusement curdling into something harder. He looked Bradley up and down, taking in her shiny butter bars, her pressed uniform, her earnest expression. "Mind your own business, butter bar," he replied, emphasizing the slang for a second lieutenant with all the contempt he could muster. When you've spent more than 5 minutes in the real Marine Corps, maybe then you can lecture me about what's necessary. Bradley's jaw tightened, but she held her ground. Professionalism isn't about time served, Staff Sergeant. It's about character. A few nearby Marines shifted uncomfortably. Challenging a staff NCO publicly was a bold move for someone so junior. Lawson's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Thornton's voice cut across the tension. "Lieutenant Bradley." The gunnery sergeant didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority dripped from every syllable. "I believe there is paperwork waiting for you in the admin building. Perhaps you should attend to your actual duties." It wasn't a suggestion. Bradley held Thornton's gaze for a long moment, then gave a curt nod and walked away. But as she passed Amber, she slowed almost imperceptibly, and something unspoken passed between them. A flicker of acknowledgement, of solidarity, gone as quickly as it had appeared. Behind the serving counter, a man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and forearms like corded rope watched the entire exchange. Silas had been cooking at this mess hall for 3 years now, ever since he traded his uniform for an apron. 22 years as a Marine before that. He had seen enough to recognize things that younger eyes missed. And right now, he was watching the cleaning woman with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. The way she held herself, the way she moved, the way her eyes never stopped scanning even when her hands were occupied with mundane tasks. Something didn't add up. Amber was clearing a table near the kitchen when she picked up a tray that had been knocked over, its contents scattered across the surface. Without thinking, she began arranging the fallen plates and utensils, aligning them in precise rows, spacing them with mechanical precision, creating order from chaos in a pattern that would have looked familiar to anyone who had ever seen a gear locker organized for inspection. Then she caught herself, her hands stilled. She glanced around quickly, but no one seemed to have noticed. No one except Silas, who had paused mid-stir, his ladle suspended over a pot of chili, his eyes fixed on her hands. The moment passed. Amber dumped the tray's contents into a bus bin and moved on. Gunnery Sergeant Thornton pushed back from his table and approached her, his shadow falling across her work like a stain. "You." He didn't bother learning her name. Names were for people who mattered. "Cleaning lady, men's latrine needs attention, now." Amber looked up at him. For a fraction of a second, so brief it might have been imagination, something flickered in the depths of her brown eyes. Something cold, something calculating. Then it was gone, replaced by the blank compliance of someone who knew better than to argue. "Yes, sir." She gathered her supplies and headed for the exit, her path taking her past a table where several Marines were conducting weapons maintenance. The M27 infantry automatic rifle lay disassembled on a cleaning mat, its components gleaming with fresh oil. Amber's gaze swept over the weapon as she passed, and paused, just for an instant, on the gas system assembly. Half a second, maybe less, just long enough to notice that the regulator was set incorrectly for the ammunition type they were using. Then she was gone, pushing through the door toward the men's room, leaving behind no indication that anything had registered at all. At a corner table, a young Marine watched her go. Private Noah Jennings was 19 years old, with the kind of face that still showed traces of the boy he had been before boot camp stripped away the softness. He knew what it felt like to be on the receiving end of Lawson's attention, had learned that lesson during his first week on base, when his slight build and quiet demeanor had marked him as an easy target. He also knew better than to speak up. The Corps had taught him that lesson too. But watching the cleaning woman walk away with her dignity intact despite everything they had thrown at her, he felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in months. Something like hope. The afternoon sun had shifted position by the time Amber returned from the latrine, her bucket refilled with fresh water, her expression unchanged. The mess hall had emptied slightly as the lunch rush subsided, but there were still easily 300 personnel scattered across the space, enough witnesses to whatever came next. She had barely made it 3 steps inside when a voice cut through the ambient noise. Well, well, if it isn't Camp Pendleton's newest sanitation expert. Flynn Garrett was a civilian contractor in his mid-30s, with the kind of smug confidence that came from knowing he made twice what any Marine in the room earned. He wore his clearance badge like a medal and his contempt like cologne, impossible to miss and equally unpleasant. He stood blocking her path, coffee cup in hand. A cluster of Marines gathered behind him like a Greek chorus of sycophants. "Tell me something, sweetheart," he continued, gesturing toward the weapons table she had passed earlier. "You know the difference between an M4 and a mop handle? Or is that too technical for your skill set?" A few snickers rippled through the crowd. Lawson, who had taken up residence at a nearby table, leaned back in his chair with obvious satisfaction. This was better than hazing her himself. Now someone else was doing the work while he got to watch. Amber said nothing, but her hand tightened on the mop handle, her grip shifting almost imperceptibly to what anyone with close-quarters combat training would recognize as a defensive position. Weight-centered, leverage-optimized, ready to redirect force in any direction. Flynn didn't notice. He was too busy enjoying his audience. Nothing? Not even a guess? He shook his head with mock disappointment. And here I thought they were hiring smarter trash collectors these days. The laughter grew louder, more confident. The kind of laughter that came from numbers and the certainty of impunity. Amber resumed walking, sidestepping Flynn without a word, her eyes fixed on the far corner of the room, where a spill awaited her attention. But as she passed, Flynn reached out and grabbed her shoulder. "Hey, I'm talking to you." In the space of a heartbeat, something changed. Amber pivoted. Flynn's hand was suddenly not on her shoulder, but somehow twisted at an angle that made his coffee cup clatter to the floor. She hadn't even dropped her mop. The movement had been so fast, so economically precise, that most observers weren't even sure what they had seen. Flynn stood frozen, his wrist still caught in her grip, pain flickering across his face before she released him with the same casual ease. The whole exchange had taken less than 2 seconds. "Sorry," Amber said flatly. "Reflex." She turned and walked away, leaving Flynn staring at his own hand as if it had betrayed him. At the service counter, Silas's eyes narrowed. That wasn't a move you learned from self-defense videos on the internet. That was muscle memory, forged through thousands of repetitions. That was training, real training, the kind that came with a very specific price tag. PFC Caleb Foster had been waiting for his moment all afternoon. Unlike Lawson's direct approach or Flynn's verbal jousting, Foster preferred subtlety, the kind of cruelty that left no fingerprints, no evidence, nothing that could be traced back to source. He waited until Amber had nearly finished mopping the far section of the mess hall, her bucket 3/4 full of gray water, before he made his move. A casual stroll past her work area, a slight stumble, so convincing it might have been real, and suddenly his boot connected with the bucket, sending it spinning across the freshly cleaned floor, dirty water spreading in all directions. "Oh man," Foster's voice dripped with false sympathy. "Guess you'll have to start over, huh?" Amber stared at the spreading puddle, at the floor she had just spent 20 minutes cleaning, at the smirking young Marine who was already backing away, hands raised in mock innocence. Something moved behind her eyes, not anger. Anger was too simple, too easy to read. This was colder, more patient. The look of someone who understood that revenge was a dish best served with impeccable timing. But all she said was, "Accidents happen." She retrieved the bucket, refilled it at the utility sink, returned to the spreading mess and began again, her strokes as methodical and unhurried as they had been the first time. Foster exchanged a triumphant look with Lawson across the room. Another small victory in their campaign to remind the cleaning woman of her place. They had no idea they were building their own gallows, one plank at a time. You know what else can save lives besides combat training? Having the right medical information at your fingertips. Premium health monitoring devices, the kind that track heart rate, blood oxygen, and stress levels in real time, are becoming essential for veterans transitioning to civilian life. Many former operators swear by wearable health tech that alerts them before a cardiac event or anxiety attack. Because surviving the battlefield means nothing if you don't take care of yourself at home. The afternoon crawled toward evening, and with it came a shift in the mess hall's population. The lunch crowd had given way to the dinner preparation teams, and a different energy filled the space, quieter, more focused, punctuated by the clang of industrial kitchen equipment and the shouts of cooks orchestrating the complex ballet of feeding a Marine battalion. Amber had been assigned to clean the men's latrine again, Thornton's passive-aggressive punishment for existing in his eye line. The bathroom was exactly what she expected. Graffiti scrawled across stall dividers, the sour smell of institutional neglect, and messages that ranged from crude to genuinely disturbing. One phrase caught her attention, scribbled in black marker at eye level above one of the sinks. "Female Marines assist those weak links. Hellman proved it." Her hand stilled on the paper towel dispenser she had been restocking. Hellman. The word landed like a physical blow, carrying with it a weight that no one else in this building could possibly understand. For a moment, just a moment, Amber's carefully constructed mask slipped, her jaw tightened. Her eyes went distant, focused on something far beyond these institutional walls, something measured not in miles but in memories. Then she pulled out a cleaning solution and methodically sprayed over the graffiti, watching the words dissolve into illegible streaks. Some messages weren't meant to survive. When she returned to the mess hall, the dinner service had begun in earnest. Lines of Marines snaked around the food stations, trays in hand, the controlled chaos of mealtime in full swing. Amber kept to the periphery, collecting empty trays, wiping down vacated tables, invisible in the way that only service workers could be. That's when she heard it. Lawson's voice, carrying across the room with the confidence of someone who had never learned to modulate his volume. "Yeah, that weak kid who got himself killed in Helmand last year. Remember that? Some lance corporal who couldn't hack it, got sent out on a patrol he had no business being on." Amber froze. Her entire body went rigid, mop suspended mid-stroke, her eyes locked on the back of Lawson's head with an intensity that could have burned holes through Kevlar. "Heard he was filing complaints before it happened," one of Lawson's companions added, "whining about leadership issues or some garbage, and look where that got him." Laughter. The kind of laughter that made Amber's knuckles go white around the mop handle. She forced herself to move, to breathe, to maintain the mask that had kept her invisible for 6 weeks now. But deep inside, in the place where she kept the things that mattered most, a fire had just been fed. Flynn Garrett was having a bad afternoon, and he intended to share the misery. His pride still stung from the incident with the cleaning woman, the way she had handled him, the way his own wrist had betrayed him, the way his carefully cultivated image of superiority had cracked, even briefly. He spotted her near the beverage station and approached with renewed confidence, this time flanked by 2 Marines who owed him favors, safety in numbers, witnesses who would back his version of events. "Hey, mop jockey," he called out, loud enough to draw attention. "I've got a technical question for you, since you seem to know so much about everything." Amber turned to face him, her expression neutral, waiting. Flynn smirked. "What's the cyclic rate of an M249 squad automatic weapon? In rounds per minute. Just curious if you actually know anything, or if that little move earlier was just dumb luck." The question was designed to humiliate. The M249 was a complicated weapon system that most civilians never encountered. Flynn was betting on blank stares and stammered non-answers. What he got was something else entirely. 850 rounds per minute sustained, Amber replied without hesitation, her voice flat and precise. 100 in controlled bursts. Effective range 800 meters with bipod mounted, though most operators prefer engaging under 600 for reliability. Gas-operated, open bolt, disintegrating link belt feed. Barrel change recommended every 200 rounds to prevent warping. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Flynn's smirk collapsed like a sandcastle meeting the tide. The Marines flanking him exchanged confused glances. At nearby tables, forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the kitchen noise seemed to dim for a moment. Amber picked up her mop and walked away, leaving the question hanging in the air like smoke after an explosion. At the serving counter, Silas slowly set down the serving spoon he had been holding. His eyes tracked Amber as she moved across the room, and something that might have been recognition, or maybe just confirmation, settled across his weathered features. He had met people who could recite weapon specifications before. Every single one of them had earned that knowledge the hard way. Something doesn't add up, does it? A cleaning lady with combat scars and tactical instincts? If you're dying to know her real identity, drop a comment with your best guess. And make sure you're subscribed. The truth is coming, and it's bigger than anything you've imagined. The incident with Flynn spread through the mess hall like wildfire, though the interpretations varied wildly depending on who was telling the story. Some dismissed it as luck. Maybe she had dated a Marine once, picked up some trivia along the way. Others suggested she might be a military brat, raised on bases, steeped in weapons knowledge by osmosis. A few entertained darker theories. Maybe she was a spy, an investigator, someone not quite what she appeared. Only one person in the room was actively investigating. Sergeant Major Asher Caldwell entered the mess hall at precisely 17:30 hours, as he did every evening when his schedule permitted. At 53 years old, with 31 years of service and more combat deployments than most Marines had hot meals, Caldwell carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had nothing left to prove. He collected his tray, selected his food with the methodical efficiency of long habit, and chose a seat at a corner table that offered a clear view of the entire space. Then he began to watch. His eyes found Amber almost immediately, tracking her movements as she worked her way through the dinner rush. He noted the way she positioned herself, always with her back to a wall or exit, the way her eyes swept the room in regular intervals, the way her hands never stopped moving, but her attention never wavered. Recognition stirred in his memory, not of her specifically, not yet, but of a type, a category of person he had encountered in very specific contexts throughout his career. Their eyes met across the room, just for a moment, 2 seconds at most. In that brief exchange, something passed between them, an acknowledgement of shared experience, of things understood without words, of a code that transcended rank or circumstance. Then Caldwell returned his attention to his meal, and Amber continued mopping, but both of them knew the game had just changed. The evening brought new challenges. A young Marine, fresh-faced, barely out of his teens, was loading his tray at the hot food station when disaster struck. His grip slipped on a bowl of soup, sending scalding liquid splashing across his hand and forearm. His yelp of pain cut through the dinner noise, drawing immediate attention. The Marines around him stepped back, uncertain, some reaching for napkins, none quite sure what to do. Amber was there before anyone else moved. She materialized from somewhere in the crowd, already moving with purpose. Within seconds, she had the young Marine by the elbow, guiding him toward the ice dispenser at the beverage station. "Ice in a napkin? Yes, like that," she instructed, her voice calm and commanding. "Apply pressure, but don't rub. Keep your arm elevated above your heart." She checked his pulse at the wrist, then examined the burn with quick, efficient movements. "Second degree, localized. You'll need burn cream and a light bandage, but no permanent damage." The young Marine stared at her with wide eyes. "How did you, are you a nurse or something?" "Something like that." Amber was already stepping back, melting into the background before anyone could ask more questions. From his table, Silas observed the entire exchange. His expression remained neutral, but his mind was racing. That wasn't first aid learned from a manual. That was combat medic instinct, the kind you developed when treating wounds under fire, when seconds meant the difference between life and death. Whoever this woman was, she had seen things that most people only read about. Thornton had witnessed the scene as well, and his expression had shifted from contempt to something more complicated. Suspicion, perhaps. Unease. The feeling of a predator suddenly uncertain whether it was facing prey or competition. He pulled out his phone and began typing a message. "Run a background check on the new cleaner. Full workup. I want to know everything." The response would take time to arrive, but when it did, everything would change. In the meantime, the dance continued. It was nearly 1800 hours when the confrontation everyone had been anticipating finally materialized. A scuffle broke out near the condiment station. 2 Marines who had been nursing a grudge for weeks, their conflict finally boiling over into physical action. Fists flew, a table crashed, trays scattered in all directions. The response was almost instant. Other Marines moved to separate the combatants, but the 2 men were drunk on adrenaline and weeks of suppressed rage. They twisted free, came together again, and suddenly what had been a fistfight threatened to become something much worse. That's when Amber intervened. She moved through the chaos like water through rocks, flowing, inevitable, unstoppable. Her hands found pressure points with surgical precision. Her body positioned itself to neutralize leverage, redirect momentum, disable without damaging. 4 seconds. That's all it took. Both Marines were on the ground, immobilized, their arms twisted at angles that made resistance impossible but caused no actual harm. They stared up at her, with expressions of pure shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Amber released them smoothly and stepped back, already reaching for her mop as if she had merely been clearing a spill. "Sorry," she said to no one in particular. "Old habits." The mess hall had gone silent. 300 Marines stood frozen, staring at the small cleaning woman who had just incapacitated 2 trained fighters in less time than it took to order coffee. Lawson's voice broke the silence, loud but uncertain. "Lucky grab. She probably watched some YouTube videos or something." But his voice lacked conviction, and across the room, Silas was shaking his head slowly, a grim smile playing at his lips. "Son," he murmured under his breath, too quietly for anyone else to hear, "that wasn't YouTube. That was MC Map Level 5, maybe higher, instructor-level technique." He had spent 22 years in the Marines. He knew what real training looked like, and whatever this woman was, cleaning lady, wasn't even close. Lieutenant Fiona Bradley found Amber in the utility closet, restocking supplies as if she hadn't just demonstrated combat skills that most Marines would envy. "We need to talk." Amber continued loading paper towels onto a shelf, her movements unhurried. "I'm working. You and I both know that work isn't the only thing you're doing here." Bradley kept her voice low, conscious of the ears that seemed to populate every corner of this base. "That move you pulled out there, that wasn't self-defense 101. Who are you, really?" For a long moment, Amber said nothing. Then she turned, meeting Bradley's gaze with an expression that held neither hostility nor warmth, simply a weary recognition. "I'm exactly who I need to be right now," she said quietly. "Whatever you think you know or think you figured out, keep it to yourself, for your own sake." Bradley opened her mouth to argue, but something in Amber's eyes stopped her, something old and tired and infinitely sad. "Just trust me," Amber continued. "When the time is right, everything will become clear, but that time isn't now." She picked up her supply bucket and brushed past the lieutenant, leaving Bradley standing alone in the utility closet with more questions than answers. Outside, the California sun was beginning its descent toward the Pacific. Shadows lengthened across the parade ground, and somewhere in the maze of Camp Pendleton's administrative buildings, a database search was returning results that would shatter everything. The evening mess hall crowd had thinned to perhaps 150 stragglers when Flynn Garrett made his move. His pride still smarted from the earlier humiliation, not just the wrist incident, but the weapons knowledge display that had made him look like an amateur in front of his carefully cultivated audience. He needed to reassert dominance, to prove that whatever lucky breaks the cleaning woman had been enjoying were nothing more than statistical anomalies. He found her near the weapons maintenance area, where a group of Marines were still cleaning their equipment before evening inspection. Several M27 IARs lay disassembled on the tables, along with an assortment of cleaning supplies and armorer's tools. "Hey, genius," Flynn called out, drawing the attention of everyone in the vicinity. "Since you know so much about guns, let's see you prove it." He picked up an M27 that had been giving the armorer problems all day, a weapon that kept jamming no matter what they tried. "This rifle's been malfunctioning for a week. 3 qualified armorers couldn't figure out the problem." He thrust it toward Amber. "If you're so smart, fix it." It was a trap, and everyone knew it. Even if she could identify the problem, solving it would require specialized tools and expertise that no cleaning woman could possibly possess. And when she failed, Flynn would have his vindication. Amber looked at the rifle, then at Flynn, then at the assembled Marines, who were watching with varying expressions of anticipation and discomfort. She set down her mop. The room went quiet. Her hands moved with eerie precision, stripping the weapon with a speed that made the watching armorers blink. 47 seconds, someone was counting, and the M27 lay disassembled on the table, its components spread in an organized pattern that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. Amber examined the gas system, the bolt carrier group, the firing pin. Her fingers probed with the confidence of a surgeon, testing, measuring, evaluating. "Extractor spring," she announced. "It's worn, lost about 15% of its tension. That's causing inconsistent extraction, which leads to double feeds and failure to eject." She began reassembling the weapon with the same mechanical precision. "You'll need a replacement spring. Until then, reduce your cyclic rate and clean the chamber after every 100 rounds." 52 seconds. The armorer's official record was 52 seconds for complete disassembly and reassembly. She had done it in less while diagnosing the problem. The rifle clicked back together. Amber handed it to Flynn, who accepted it with numb fingers. "Anything else?" she asked. Flynn had no response. For once in his life, words failed him completely. From the corner of the room, Thornton watched with an expression that had moved beyond suspicion into genuine alarm. His phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at the screen. "No criminal record, employment history, classified." Classified. The words sat in his stomach like ice. There were only a handful of reasons why someone's employment history would be classified at the federal level, and none of them suggested that this woman was just a cleaning lady looking for honest work. Thornton slipped out of the mess hall, his mind racing through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Speaking of protecting what matters, military families know better than anyone that life can change in an instant. That's why specialized insurance plans designed for veterans and active duty personnel have become critical. Coverage that understands combat-related conditions, deployment gaps, and the unique challenges military families face. Because the ones who serve our country deserve financial protection that actually serves them back. The classified background report had triggered something in Thornton. Not caution, as it should have, but paranoia. In his mind, there was only one explanation that made sense. The cleaning woman was CID, Criminal Investigation Division. Someone had gotten suspicious about the unit's culture, about the incidents that kept getting swept under the rug, about the complaints that disappeared into filing cabinets never to be seen again. If that was true, he needed to change his approach. Fast. The next morning found Thornton at his most obsequiously professional. When he passed Amber in the corridor, he actually nodded to her, a gesture so unprecedented that the Marines who witnessed it wondered if they had somehow slipped into an alternate dimension. "Morning," he said, his voice strained with the effort of civility. Amber nodded back without comment, continuing on her way. But Lawson hadn't gotten the memo. The staff sergeant had spent the night nursing his grievances alongside a 12-pack of beer, and by morning he had convinced himself that everything was the cleaning woman's fault. His humiliation, his subordinates' wavering respect, the general sense that things were spinning out of his control. He cornered her near the mess hall's rear entrance, where the delivery trucks unloaded supplies. 4 of his most loyal Marines flanked him, blocking the exits. "You've been making us look bad," Lawson said, stepping closer until he was inside her personal space. "That stops now. I don't care who you are or who you think you are. On this base, you're nothing. Garbage. And garbage gets taken out." Amber remained motionless. Her expression didn't flicker, but something in her posture shifted, weight transferring to the balls of her feet, hands loosening at her sides, spine straightening almost imperceptibly. "Walk away, Staff Sergeant." Her voice was quiet, almost gentle, "while you still can." Lawson laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Is that a threat from a cleaning lady?" He glanced at his companions, inviting them to share the joke. "Do you have any idea who I am? What I can do to you?" "I know exactly who you are." Amber's eyes held his, unblinking. "I know what you've done, who you've hurt, what you've covered up." A pause. "And I know about Helmand, about the Lance Corporal who filed complaints, about what really happened to him." The color drained from Lawson's face. His smirk collapsed. The Marines behind him exchanged confused glances, sensing that something had just shifted in the power dynamics of the conversation, but not understanding what. "How do you—" Lawson's voice cracked. "That's classified. That's— Last warning." Amber's tone had dropped to something approaching freezing point. "Walk away." For a moment, the confrontation balanced on a knife's edge. Lawson's hands twitched at his sides, part of him wanting to strike, another part screaming warnings that his conscious mind refused to acknowledge. In the end, it was one of his companions who broke the standoff, a corporal who mumbled something about being late for formation and began backing away. The others followed, their unity shattering like ice on warm water. Lawson stood alone, facing a woman he had dismissed as insignificant, feeling for the first time in years the cold wind of vulnerability on his neck. "This isn't over," he managed. "No," Amber agreed. "It isn't." She picked up her mop and walked past him into the mess hall, leaving him standing in the loading dock with the distinct impression that he had just stepped on a landmine and was waiting for it to detonate. We're seconds away from the biggest reveal of this story. Before everything changes forever, take 1 second to hit subscribe and share this with someone who loves a good military justice story. What happens next will give you chills. I promise you're not ready for this. Corporal Heather Walsh had been spreading a new rumor all morning, an attempt to explain away the cleaning woman's inexplicable competence in a way that preserved the social order. "She's obviously an ex-military wife," Walsh declared to anyone who would listen. "Married some Marine, picked up a few tricks during the divorce. Now she's trying to make us all look stupid. It's pathetic, really." The theory gained traction because it was comfortable. It allowed people to acknowledge what they had witnessed without having to reconsider their fundamental assumptions about who belonged where in the military hierarchy. Only Silas and Sergeant Major Caldwell knew how laughably wrong it was. They found themselves sharing a table for dinner that evening, their conversation conducted in the subtext beneath their actual words. "Interesting woman," Caldwell observed, stirring his coffee. "The new cleaning staff," Silas grunted. "Noticed that myself. MC map level 5 at least, wouldn't you say?" "Higher," Silas replied. "I've trained with Marine Raider instructors who moved slower." Caldwell nodded slowly, his eyes tracking Amber as she worked the far side of the room. "I put in some inquiries, unofficial channels, the kind that know things that don't appear on paperwork. And? Ghost ravens." Silas's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Ghost ravens. MARSOC's most classified special operations unit. So classified that most Marines considered them a myth, a story told to recruits who asked too many questions about where the truly dangerous missions went. "That's not possible," Silas said, but his voice lacked conviction. I saw the unit designation myself 15 years ago," Caldwell replied. "Only once, only briefly, but I remember the emblem, Black Eagle, 7 silver stars." His eyes met Silas's. "I also remember the woman who was leading that team when they exfiltrated our patrol in Fallujah. Small, quiet, moved like water over rocks." He took a slow sip of coffee. "Called herself Raven." Silas set down his cup with exaggerated care, as if it might explode if handled roughly. The implications of what Caldwell was suggesting were staggering. Not just who this woman was, but why she might be here, pretending to be something she wasn't. "The Commandant," he said slowly. "The inspections they've been running?" "Undercover culture assessments," Caldwell confirmed. 3 bases so far, according to my sources. Cleaning out the rot from the inside. He glanced toward Amber, who was methodically wiping down a table with no indication she was aware of their attention. "Apparently, the rot here is substantial enough to warrant personal attention." "Lawson," Silas breathed. "Thornton. The harassment cases that kept disappearing. Among other things." Caldwell's expression hardened. "You remember Lance Corporal Holloway, the kid who died in Helmand last year?" The name landed like a physical blow. Silas remembered. Of course he remembered. Young man, idealistic, had been filing complaints about unit culture for months before his death. Officially, he had been killed in action during a routine patrol. Unofficially, rumors had circulated that he had been deliberately assigned to a dangerous mission as punishment for speaking up. "Holloway," Silas repeated. Then his eyes widened. "The cleaning woman's name tag." "Amber," Caldwell said quietly. "Amber Holloway." The connection crystallized with terrible clarity. This wasn't just an inspection, this was personal. "His sister?" Caldwell shook his head. "I don't know the specifics, but I know she requested this assignment specifically. And I know that whatever she finds, there are people at the highest levels waiting for her report." Silas absorbed this in silence. Around them, the mess hall continued its normal rhythms. Trays clattering, voices rising and falling, Marines eating and laughing and complaining about the same things Marines had always complained about. None of them had any idea what was building in their midst. Colonel Raymond Prescott was having an unusually late dinner when his aide approached with a concerned expression. "Sir, we've got a situation developing in the mess hall. Staff Sergeant Lawson and some of his people." Prescott sighed. Lawson had been a problem for months now, but the man had connections and a clean enough record on paper that direct intervention had been politically complicated. What now? Apparently, there was a confrontation with one of the civilian cleaning staff, but that's not the unusual part. The aide lowered his voice. "The unusual part is that I've been getting calls from DC. Multiple calls. People asking about the cleaning staff we hired 6 weeks ago." Prescott set down his fork. DC didn't call about cleaning staff unless cleaning staff were something more than they appeared. "Get me the personnel file for every civilian hired in the last 2 months, he ordered. "And find Sergeant Major Caldwell. I have a feeling he knows something about this that I need to hear." The colonel rose from his table and straightened his uniform. Whatever was happening in his mess hall, he intended to find out personally. The evening sun cast long shadows through the windows as the mess hall prepared for its final cleaning of the day. Most of the dinner crowd had dispersed, leaving behind empty tables and the detritus of institutional feeding, crumbs, spills, the occasional forgotten personal item. Amber worked methodically through the space, her movements unchanged from the hundreds of hours she had spent in this same pattern over the past 6 weeks. But something had shifted in the atmosphere. She could feel eyes on her that hadn't been there before, could sense the quiet conversations that stopped when she drew near. The endgame was approaching. Lawson found her near the center of the room, flanked by his remaining loyalists. His earlier encounter had rattled him, but fear had a way of curdling into aggression in men like him. He couldn't walk away from a challenge, not when his authority was at stake. "You and me," he said, blocking her path. "We're going to settle this right now." Amber looked up at him with the patient expression of someone who had weathered worse storms than this. There's nothing to settle, Staff Sergeant. The hell there isn't. Lawson stepped closer, using his height and bulk to crowd her space. You've been making trouble since you got here, playing games, acting like you're better than everyone. His voice rose, drawing attention from the remaining Marines in the hall. Well, I'm done playing. You're going to apologize for every embarrassment you've caused me, right here, in front of everyone, or I'll make you regret ever setting foot on this base. The threat hung in the air between them. Around them, a circle was forming. Marines who sensed something significant about to happen, drawn by the ancient human instinct for spectacle. Amber set down her mop with deliberate care. Her eyes moved across the crowd, noting positions, counting bodies, mapping exits. Then they returned to Lawson's flushed face. No. The single word landed like a slap. Lawson's expression contorted. What did you just... I said no. I'm not apologizing for your embarrassment. That's a burden you created for yourself. Her voice was calm, level, carrying across the sudden silence. Every time you chose to belittle instead of lead. Every time you used your rank as a weapon instead of a responsibility. Every victim you created and every complaint you buried. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable. These weren't the words of a cleaning woman. This was an indictment. Lawson's self-control snapped. His hand shot out, grabbing her shoulder and shoving her backward toward the wall. The momentum carried her back. One step, 2 steps, and then contact, her back against the concrete wall, his hands still gripping her uniform. Something ripped. The sound was small, fabric giving way under stress, but in the cathedral silence of the mess hall, it might as well have been a thunderclap. Her work shirt had torn at the shoulder, revealing the skin beneath. And on that skin, in black ink and silver detail, was something that made every Marine in the room inhale sharply. A black eagle with 7 silver stars arranged in a precise pattern. Below it, a ribbon rendered in exacting detail, the unmistakable design of the Medal of Honor. And below that, 3 words in Gothic script, Helmond 2018, never forget. 3 seconds of absolute silence. No one breathed, no one moved. 300 years of accumulated combat experience stood frozen, staring at something that most of them had believed was a myth. Silas's spatula clattered to the floor. His voice cut through the stillness. Ghost Ravens. That's MARSOC Ghost Unit 7. He took a shaky breath. They're not supposed to exist. They're not on any official record. Lawson's hand fell away from her shoulder, as if burned. His face had gone the color of old paper. That can't be real. Amber straightened slowly, making no move to cover the revealed tattoo. Her eyes swept the crowd with an expression that mixed weariness with something harder, the look of a predator that had finally stopped pretending to be prey. The doors to the mess hall burst open. Colonel Raymond Prescott strode in with the force of a natural disaster, his aides scrambling to keep pace. He took in the scene with a single sweep, the frozen crowd, the pale staff sergeant, the small woman with the exposed shoulder, and his expression shifted through confusion to recognition to something approaching reverence. "Attention on deck," someone called automatically. Nobody moved. They were already at attention, rendered motionless by something more powerful than any command. Prescott walked directly to Amber. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. The colonel and the cleaning woman, rank and obscurity, the official structure, and something that transcended it entirely. Then Colonel Raymond Prescott, commanding officer of one of the largest Marine installations in the United States, drew himself to his full height and executed a salute of textbook precision. "Master Gunnery Sergeant Holloway," his voice carried across the silent hall. "It's been a long time." The words detonated like a bomb. Master Gunnery Sergeant, the highest enlisted rank in the Marine Corps below Sergeant Major, a designation that required 18 years of exceptional service, multiple combat deployments, and a level of expertise that most Marines never achieved. From across the room, Sergeant Major Caldwell stepped forward, taking his position at Amber's right side. His own salute was crisp, professional, weighted with decades of shared history. "Welcome back, Raven." Lieutenant Bradley was crying. She hadn't meant to, hadn't even realized the tears were falling until they reached her chin. Everything she had suspected, everything she had sensed but couldn't prove, was suddenly laid bare before her. Private Noah Jennings stared with his mouth open, a smile slowly spreading across his young face. The cleaning woman who had shown him kindness, who had demonstrated that dignity could survive any assault, she was one of the most decorated warriors in Marine Corps history. The old Marine at the far table, the one who had been observing everything with quiet attention, dropped into parade rest with the automatic precision of 30 years of service. He had known. Somehow, he had known all along. And Staff Sergeant Brick Lawson? He stood rooted to the spot, trembling, as the full weight of what he had done crashed over him like a tsunami. The insults, the shoves, the bucket kicked across the floor. Every petty cruelty he had inflicted on this woman, believing her to be beneath him. He had assaulted a Medal of Honor recipient. He had mocked a MARSOC operator. He had pushed around someone who had probably killed more enemies of America than he would ever encounter in his entire career. His legs buckled. He would have fallen if the Marines beside him hadn't caught his arms. Around the mess hall, phones appeared in hands. The recording had started. Whatever happened next would be documented, shared, analyzed, and remembered. The legend of Camp Pendleton's cleaning woman was about to become immortal. The silence in the mess hall had taken on a physical weight, pressing down on every shoulder, filling every lung with the thick awareness that history was being made in real time. Colonel Prescott held his salute for a long 3 count before lowering his hand. His eyes never left Amber's face, or rather, Master Gunnery Sergeant Amber Raven Holloway's face. The transformation was remarkable. Same woman, same features, same compact frame, but something fundamental had shifted in how she carried herself. The submissive cleaning woman had evaporated like morning mist, replaced by a warrior whose presence seemed to expand to fill the entire room. For those who don't know, Prescott's voice carried the weight of official pronouncement, and I suspect that includes most of you, Master Gunnery Sergeant Amber Holloway. 18 years of active service. 4 combat tours spanning 3 theaters of operation. He paused, letting the words sink in. Led Ghost Ravens, MARSOC's most classified special operations unit, through Helmand, Fallujah, and at least 3 operations that don't officially exist and never will. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ghost Ravens, the name passed from lip to lip like a forbidden prayer. Medal of Honor recipient, Prescott continued. Silver Star with Valor device. 3 Purple Hearts, and approximately 47 other commendations that remain classified at levels I don't have access to. His jaw tightened. In short, you've been mocking, harassing, and assaulting one of the most decorated combat veterans in the history of the United States Marine Corps. Lawson made a sound, something between a whimper and a groan. His knees had given out completely now, and only the Marines holding his arms kept him upright. His face had progressed past pale into a sickly green that suggested imminent physical distress. Amber finally spoke, her voice cutting through the whispers like a blade through silk. Also, here on direct orders from the Commandant of the Marine Corps. She let that land before continuing. Cultural assessment. Undercover. 6 weeks of observation, documentation, and evidence gathering. Her eyes found Lawson's, and what he saw there made him flinch as if struck. Assessment complete. The words fell like a guillotine blade. From somewhere in the crowd, a challenge coin clattered to the floor. It had fallen from Amber's torn pocket during the confrontation. Colonel Prescott bent to retrieve it, and when he straightened, his face had gone the color of old parchment. This, his voice cracked slightly, this is the Commandant's personal coin, the one he carries himself. He turned it over in his fingers, examining the distinctive markings. He only gives these to people he trusts with his life. I've seen exactly 2 of these in my entire career. 3 now, Amber replied quietly. He gave me that one after Helmand, after I brought his godson home alive when everyone else on the extraction team was convinced it was a suicide mission. The revelation landed like another bomb. The Commandant's godson, a rescue mission so dangerous that experienced operators had written it off. And this woman, this small, quiet woman they had dismissed as garbage, had accomplished what no one else could. Thornton's phone slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering against the floor. He understood now why the background check had come back classified. He understood why his attempts to dig deeper had hit walls that seemed to extend to infinity. And he understood, with crystalline clarity, that his career was over. Amber's gaze shifted to him, and her voice dropped to something approaching freezing point. Gunnery Sergeant Thornton, Sergeant Major Caldwell has been documenting everything for 6 weeks. Every incident of harassment, every complaint that disappeared, every victim who was silenced, she paused, every cover-up. Caldwell stepped forward, producing a thick manila folder from inside his jacket. 73 documented incidents, he announced. 41 witnesses willing to provide sworn statements, digital recordings of 14 separate conversations in which senior NCOs discussed suppressing harassment complaints. He handed the folder to Colonel Prescott. The full report goes to the commandant's office tonight. The color drained from Thornton's face so completely that he might have been carved from marble. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound emerged. Amber turned back to Lawson, taking a single step toward him. The Marines holding him instinctively released their grip and stepped back, as if proximity to her target had suddenly become dangerous. Staff Sergeant Brick Lawson. Her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the silent hall. You have the right to remain silent. Shore Patrol is waiting outside. I suggest you exercise that right, because anything you say at this point will only make things worse. As if summoned by her words, the mess hall doors opened again. 4 Shore Patrol officers entered in formation, their expressions professionally neutral, their handcuffs already visible. Lawson found his voice at last, a broken, desperate sound. Please, I didn't know. I never would have. If I had known who you were, that's exactly the problem. Amber's response was quiet but devastating. You thought I was no one. You thought I was nothing, and that made it acceptable to treat me like garbage. She shook her head slowly. The measure of a person's character isn't how they treat their equals. It's how they treat those they believe are beneath them. The Shore Patrol officers reached Lawson. The click of handcuffs echoed through the hall like the closing of a coffin lid. Staff Sergeant Brick Lawson, you are being detained pending investigation for assault, conduct unbecoming, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The lead officer's voice was professionally flat. Additional charges may be filed following review of evidence. They led him away. He didn't resist, couldn't resist. Whatever fight had been in him had evaporated completely, leaving behind only the hollow shell of a man watching his life collapse in real time. Thornton was next. He tried to muster some dignity as the Shore Patrol approached him, but his hands shook as they were pulled behind his back. Gunnery Sergeant Derek Thornton, you are being detained pending investigation on 8 counts of conduct unbecoming, obstruction of justice, and failure to report known incidents of harassment and assault. 8 counts. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Flynn Garrett didn't wait for the Shore Patrol to reach him. The civilian contractor was already backing toward the exit, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. I'm a civilian, he stammered. You can't. Military jurisdiction doesn't. Your contract includes a clause submitting you to UCMJ authority while on base, Colonel Prescott interrupted coldly. Something you might have read more carefully before signing. He nodded to the Shore Patrol. Escort Mr. Garrett to the holding facility. His employer will be notified, and his security clearance is hereby suspended pending investigation. Flynn's protest faded as he was led away, his carefully constructed world of superiority and contempt crumbling around him. PFC Caleb Foster tried to disappear into the crowd, but Caldwell's eyes found him with the precision of a targeting laser. Private First Class Foster, you might want to step forward voluntarily. It will look better in your file than being dragged out. Foster's face crumpled. For a moment, he looked like what he was, a 20-year-old kid who had made terrible choices and was only now beginning to understand the consequences. He stepped forward on shaking legs. I'm sorry, he whispered. Everyone else was doing it, and you thought following the crowd would protect you. Amber's voice held no sympathy, but also no cruelty. It never does. The crowd scatters when consequences arrive. You're left standing alone with your choices. Foster nodded miserably as Shore Patrol took his arms. He would face lesser charges, harassment, conduct unbecoming, but his career was effectively over before it had properly begun. Corporal Heather Walsh was crying openly now, mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. She stepped forward before anyone could call her name. I'm sorry, she choked out. I spread rumors. I made things worse. I was jealous and petty, and I took it out on someone who didn't deserve it. Her eyes met Amber's. I know sorry isn't enough, but it's all I have. Amber studied her for a long moment. The rumors you spread created a hostile environment that made others feel empowered to escalate. Your words had consequences beyond what you intended. She paused. But you stepped forward on your own. That counts for something. Walsh was escorted out with the others, but her treatment was notably gentler. Voluntary confession carried weight in the military justice system. The mess hall had emptied of its primary antagonists, but 300 Marines remained, witnesses to everything that had transpired, participants in a story that would be told and retold for generations. Colonel Prescott turned to address the room, his voice carrying the weight of command. What you've witnessed here tonight will be discussed, analyzed, and investigated at the highest levels. Some of you may be called as witnesses. All of you will be expected to cooperate fully with any inquiries. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled faces. But more importantly, I want you to understand what this means. We failed. I failed. This base developed a culture where harassment was tolerated, where complaints were suppressed, where good Marines were driven out while toxic leaders flourished. That ends tonight. His eyes found Lieutenant Bradley in the crowd. Lieutenant Bradley, you attempted to intervene when others remained silent. That took courage, especially given your rank. I'll be recommending you for commendation, and I want you in my office tomorrow morning to discuss expanded responsibilities. Bradley's tears had dried, replaced by an expression of stunned gratitude. She straightened to attention. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Private Jennings. Prescott's gaze moved to the young Marine who had watched everything with wide eyes. Master Gunnery Sergeant Holloway has requested that you be assigned as her aide during the remainder of her time on this base. Consider it an opportunity to learn from one of the best. Noah Jennings looked like he might pass out from shock and joy combined. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed a strangled, "Yes, sir." Finally, Prescott turned to Silas, who had been watching the entire proceedings with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose suspicions had been comprehensively confirmed. "And Silas." The colonel's formality softened slightly. "Or should I say Sergeant Major Silas Crawford, retired. I'm told you've been keeping your own observations during this period." Silas straightened, decades of military bearing reasserting itself despite his cook's apron. "Just doing what I was trained to do, sir. Watching, assessing, keeping notes." A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. "Old habits. Your notes have been added to the official record," Prescott confirmed, "and the Commandant sends his personal thanks. Apparently, you two served together in Desert Storm." "He was a lieutenant then," Silas replied. "Good officer. I'm glad to see he remembered." The formal announcements complete, Prescott turned back to Amber. The professional distance between them softened almost imperceptibly. "Master Guns," he said quietly, using the informal abbreviation that signified respect among senior enlisted. "I owe you a personal apology. This was my base. These were my Marines. The failures that allowed this culture to develop happened on my watch." Amber shook her head. "Cultures don't develop overnight, Colonel, and they don't change without pressure. That's why the Commandant started this program, because sometimes the rot goes deep enough that you need outside eyes to see it clearly. Will you be staying? To see it through? For a few more days." Her voice had lost its edge, settling into something more human. "There are things I need to finish here, people I need to talk to, and—" She hesitated. "There's a memorial wall I need to visit." Understanding flickered across Prescott's face. "Lance Corporal Holloway. My brother." The words fell into silence like stones into deep water. Around the room, the remaining Marines absorbed this new piece of information, adding it to their understanding of who this woman was and why she had done what she had done. This hadn't just been an inspection, this was a sister seeking truth about her brother's death. And for those who have witnessed injustice like what happened in this mess hall, knowing your legal rights matters. Online legal education platforms now offer courses specifically for military personnel, understanding UCMJ, veterans' rights, and how to document workplace misconduct. Knowledge that could have saved Lawson's victims years of suffering. Because in the military or civilian world, understanding the law is your first line of defense. The evening had given way to night, and the mess hall had finally emptied of all but essential personnel. The cleaning that Amber had spent 6 weeks performing was now being handled by others, a pointed reminder of how quickly circumstances could change. She stood before the base memorial wall, her reflection ghosting across the polished granite surface where names were carved in precise rows. So many names. So many stories ended too soon. Her finger found the one she was looking for without conscious thought, muscle memory guiding her to the spot she had visited in her mind 1,000 times. PFC Levi Holloway, KIA Helmand Province, August 14, 2019. The letters were cold beneath her fingertip. Cold and permanent, the only physical trace remaining of the brother who had followed her into service, who had believed in the same ideals, who had paid the ultimate price. I kept my promise, Levi. Her voice was barely a whisper, meant for no ears but his. I found out what happened here, what they did to you, how they silenced your complaints and then sent you on that patrol as punishment for speaking up. Her jaw tightened. The official record called it killed in action, a routine patrol that encountered unexpected resistance, casualties sustained in the resulting firefight. Standard military tragedy, the kind that happened with numbing regularity in combat zones. But the unofficial record, the one she had spent 18 months piecing together through classified channels and unofficial conversations, told a different story. A young Marine who refused to stay silent about leadership failures, complaints filed through proper channels that mysteriously disappeared, and finally, assignment to a patrol that everyone knew was suicide, sent out with inadequate support, insufficient intelligence, and a timeline that made survival statistically improbable. They had killed her brother as surely as if they had pulled the trigger themselves, and now, finally, she could prove it. The investigation will reopen, she continued, speaking to the name carved in stone. Everyone involved in burying your complaints is going to face consequences. It won't bring you back. Nothing can do that, but maybe it will save the next Marine who tries to do the right thing. She pressed her palm flat against the cold granite, feeling the edges of the letters against her skin. I miss you every day, little brother. Every single day. Footsteps approached from behind, quiet, respectful, waiting at a distance that acknowledged the sacred nature of the moment. Amber didn't turn. Private Jennings, she said. You can come closer. Noah approached hesitantly, coming to stand beside her before the wall. His young face was solemn, marked by the gravity of everything he had witnessed. I didn't know, he said quietly. About your brother. About why you were really here. No one was supposed to know. That was the point. Amber finally turned to face him. The people who created this culture would never have shown their true colors if they knew they were being watched. They had to believe I was nobody, just another invisible person they could ignore or abuse without consequence. Noah nodded slowly, processing. Is that why you let them treat you like that, even though you could have stopped them at any time? Partly. Amber's gaze returned to the memorial wall, but also because stopping them wasn't enough. I needed evidence, documentation, witnesses. I needed to build a case so complete that no one could bury it the way they buried my brother's complaints. That must have been hard, pretending to be helpless when you're... He trailed off, uncertain how to complete the thought. When I'm what? A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Dangerous, trained, capable of handling anything they could throw at me? Yeah, that. Amber was quiet for a moment. There's a lesson in there, Private. One that took me years to learn. She turned to face him fully. Strength isn't about proving you're powerful. It's about choosing when and how to use that power. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait, watch, gather your forces. And then, when the moment is right, strike with everything you have. Like tonight. Like tonight, she nodded. But the corollary is equally important. Never use strength to hurt those weaker than yourself. That's not power. That's cowardice. The strong protect the weak. That's what being a warrior actually means. Noah absorbed this in silence, his young face reflecting the weight of the lesson. After a moment, he spoke again. What happens now? To the base, I mean. To the Marines who were involved. Investigations, courts-martial for some, administrative discipline for others. The ones who participated actively will face the harshest consequences. But anyone who knew and stayed silent will also have to answer for their choices. She paused. It's not going to be pleasant. Healing never is. And you? I have choices to make. Amber turned away from the memorial wall, her expression shifting to something more contemplative. The Commandant offered me retirement with full honors. 20 years of service, more combat than most people experience in 3 lifetimes, and enough scars, visible and invisible, to last several eternities. But you're not going to take it. It wasn't a question. Noah had spent enough time watching her over the past hours to recognize something in her bearing. A restlessness, a hunger for purpose that retirement could never satisfy. Amber's smile widened slightly. Perceptive? No, I'm not going to take it. There's too much work left to do. She gestured vaguely toward the world beyond the base. 3 other installations have been flagged for the same kind of assessment. Same patterns of toxic leadership, same suppression of complaints, same culture of silence and fear. You're going to clean them up too. Someone has to. Her eyes met his. Would you like to be part of that? Learn what real leadership looks like from the inside? Noah's eyes widened. Me? But I'm just a private. I've barely been in the Corps for 8 months. Everyone starts somewhere, Amber's voice softened. I was a private once too. Scared, uncertain, not sure if I belonged, but someone saw potential in me and took the time to nurture it. That's how the chain continues, each generation lifting the next. Noah swallowed hard, emotion threatening to overwhelm his composure. I'd be honored, Master Gunnery Sergeant, more than honored. Good, because the first lesson starts now. Amber began walking, gesturing for him to follow. Real warriors don't advertise. They protect. They serve. They put the mission and their people before their own ego. Everything else flows from that foundation. They walk together through the California night, mentor and student, the beginning of a new chapter in both their stories. Justice has been served, but Amber's story is far from over. If this gave you chills, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories of hidden heroes getting the respect they deserve. Comment Raven if you want to see what mission she takes on next. Morning came to Camp Pendleton with the kind of crystalline clarity that only Southern California could provide. The sun rose over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, warming a base that had been fundamentally transformed overnight. The mess hall opened for breakfast at 0600, as it always did. But everything else was different. The atmosphere had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. Conversations were quieter, more thoughtful. Eye contact was more frequent, more genuine. The invisible hierarchies that had governed social interaction, who could be mocked, who could be ignored, who mattered and who didn't, had been shattered beyond repair. Colonel Prescott had called an all-hands formation for 0800. Standing before the assembled battalion, he delivered a speech that would be quoted and remembered for years to come. Yesterday we received a gift, he began, his voice carrying across the parade ground. Not a comfortable gift, not an easy one, but a necessary one. We were shown what we had become, and given the opportunity to become something better. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the ranks. The Marines who were detained last night will face justice through proper channels, but they are not the only ones who bear responsibility. Every time one of us witnessed harassment and stayed silent, we contributed to the problem. Every time we looked the other way when complaints were dismissed, we enabled the culture that allowed this rot to flourish. The words landed heavily. Across the formation, faces reflected varying degrees of shame, resolution, and dawning understanding. Starting today, things change, Prescott continued. New reporting systems, new accountability measures, new training on leadership and professional conduct, but more than that, a new commitment from me, from every officer and NCO, from every Marine who wears this uniform. He straightened to his full height. We will be the kind of unit that Lance Corporal Levi Holloway believed we could be when he enlisted, the kind of unit worth dying for, and more importantly, worth living for. That is my promise. That is our mission. Dismissed. The formation broke apart, but the energy that dispersed across the base was different than it had been the day before. There was purpose now, direction, the beginning of genuine change. In the mess hall, the ripple effects continued to spread. The civilian cleaning crew had been supplemented with volunteers, Marines who wanted to demonstrate that no job was beneath them, that every member of the base community deserved respect, regardless of role. Lieutenant Bradley found herself surrounded by junior officers seeking guidance, inspired by her willingness to speak up, even when it carried personal risk. She handled the attention with grace, deflecting praise and focusing on the lessons to be learned. It wasn't courage, she insisted to a group of earnest second lieutenants. It was just being unable to stay silent when something was wrong. Anyone could have done it. But no one else did, a young officer pointed out. That's the difference. Silas continued cooking, but with a new spring in his step. His observations had been validated, his instincts proven correct, and somewhere in Washington, an old friend remembered the partnership they had forged in the desert 30 years ago. The Marines who had been complicit in smaller ways, the bystanders, the silent witnesses, the ones who had laughed at jokes they knew were wrong, began the harder work of self-reflection. Some would grow from it, others would struggle, all would be changed. By mid-morning, Amber had completed her final responsibilities on base. Her report to the commandant had been transmitted through secure channels. Her recommendations for systemic improvements had been documented and filed. The evidence she and Caldwell had gathered was now in the hands of the military justice system, where it would be processed, evaluated, and acted upon. She found herself standing once more before the memorial wall, saying goodbye to her brother's name in the way she had been unable to do when she first arrived. "It's done, Levi." Her voice was steady now, carrying the peace of completed purpose. "Not everything, not yet, but the beginning. The people who failed you are facing consequences. The systems that let it happen are being rebuilt. Your death meant something." She touched the carved letters one final time. "I love you. Always." Then she turned and walked away, ready for whatever came next. Sergeant Major Caldwell intercepted her near the main gate, a folder tucked under his arm and a rare smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Leaving without saying goodbye? Just saying the important ones. Amber accepted the folder he offered, flipping it open to scan the contents. Final witness statements, and something else. Caldwell's expression grew serious. "We kept digging after you left last night, into the patrol where your brother was killed, into who made the decision to send him out." Amber's hands stilled on the papers. "And?" The order came from above Thornton's level, way above. Caldwell's voice dropped. "There's a name in there that's going to surprise you. Someone who's been promoted twice since then, moved to a new installation. The kind of career trajectory that suggests protection from somewhere high up." She found the name in the document, read it twice to make sure she hadn't misunderstood, then closed the folder with a soft click. "Thank you, Asher. Thank me by finishing what you started." Caldwell stepped back, coming to attention. "It was an honor serving with you again, Raven. Even if most of that service happened without your knowledge. You were watching me watch them. Someone had to make sure the observer had backup." He offered a formal salute. "Until next time, Master Gunnery Sergeant." She returned the salute with equal precision. "Until next time, Sergeant Major." Then she was through the gate, stepping into the civilian world she had inhabited for 6 weeks as a disguise, and was now leaving behind for good. The California sun was warm on her face as she walked toward the parking lot where her personal vehicle waited. Everything felt different now, lighter somehow, as if she had set down a burden she hadn't fully realized she was carrying. Levi's death would always hurt. That wound would never fully heal. But the poison of unanswered questions, of suppressed truth, of justice denied, that poison was finally draining away. She was halfway to her car when her phone buzzed. Unknown number, DC area code. Amber answered on the second ring. "Holloway." "Raven." The voice on the other end was gravelly, familiar, a voice she had heard in secure briefings and classified communications for nearly a decade. "Impressive work at Pendleton. Cleaner than we expected, faster than we hoped." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet." A pause, weighted with implication. "We have a situation. 3 other installations showing the same patterns, same toxic culture, same suppression systems, same protection from somewhere in the chain of command. I'm aware. I've already volunteered for the task force." "Good, because there's more." The voice hardened. "One of those installations is where your father served, before he disappeared." Amber stopped walking. The California sun suddenly felt less warm. "My father's case was closed 15 years ago. MIA, presumed deceased. It was closed because someone wanted it closed. We've been finding threads, Raven. Threads that lead back further than we expected, connecting things we didn't think were connected." A pause. "Your brother's death, your father's disappearance, the protection networks keeping certain officers above consequences. It's all part of the same web." Her hand tightened on the phone. 15 years of unanswered questions about her father, 18 months of searching for truth about her brother, and now someone was suggesting they were linked, part of a larger pattern that she had only glimpsed the edges of. "What do you need from me?" "Lead the task force, root out the corruption at all 3 installations. And while you're doing that, follow the threads, find out where they lead." The voice softened slightly. "I know I'm asking a lot. This isn't just an assignment anymore, it's personal. If you want to step back, hand it to someone else, no one would blame you." Amber watched the sun climb higher over the Pacific, painting the water in shades of gold. She thought about Levi, carved in cold granite, about a father who had gone on a routine assignment and never come home, about all the Marines who had suffered under toxic leadership, whose complaints had been buried, whose careers and lives had been damaged by people who faced no consequences. "I'm not stepping back." Her voice carried the steel that had earned her the Medal of Honor. "Send me the files, all of them, already in your secure inbox. A hint of approval colored the response. Your task force is being assembled. First briefing is in 48 hours at the Pentagon. Don't be late. The line went dead. Amber stood in the parking lot for a long moment, phone still in hand, mind racing through implications and possibilities. Her father, her brother. A web of corruption stretching across multiple installations, protected by people at levels she hadn't yet identified. This wasn't just a cleanup mission anymore. This was the beginning of something much larger. Her car beeped as she unlocked it remotely. Inside, on the passenger seat, was a folder that hadn't been there when she left the vehicle yesterday. Someone had bypassed her security system to deliver it, which meant someone very good, or someone with official access. She opened it carefully. Photographs, documents, organizational charts with names and arrows connecting people across different commands, different installations, different years. A network mapped in meticulous detail, with her father's name circled in red at one node and her brother's at another. And at the center of the web, a name she didn't recognize, yet, but would come to know very well in the months ahead. A sticky note was attached to the first page, handwritten in precise military script. Welcome to the deep end, Raven. Trust no one, question everything, and watch your back. They know you're coming. No signature. No indication of who had provided this intelligence or why. But as Amber started her car and pulled out of the Camp Pendleton parking lot, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. The electric anticipation of a hunt just beginning. Somewhere out there, the people responsible for her father's disappearance and her brother's death were going about their lives, confident that their secrets were buried too deep to ever be uncovered. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The Pacific Coast Highway stretched before her, winding north toward whatever came next. Behind her, Camp Pendleton was already receding into the distance. One chapter closed, another opening. In the mess hall she had left behind, Private Noah Jennings was beginning his first day as something more than he had been before. Lieutenant Fiona Bradley was drafting proposals for systemic improvements that would become models for the entire Marine Corps. Colonel Raymond Prescott was making phone calls that would reshape leadership culture across his command. And somewhere in a holding facility, Staff Sergeant Brick Lawson was beginning to understand that a moment's cruelty toward a woman he had dismissed as nothing had cost him everything he thought he was. The road unwound before her, and Amber Holloway, Master Gunnery Sergeant, Ghost Raven, Medal of Honor recipient, sister, daughter, warrior, drove toward the future with her eyes fixed firmly ahead. There were still questions to answer, still justice to seek, still truth to uncover, but for the first time in 18 months, she felt something like hope. The story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The sun climbed higher as the miles passed. Ocean on one side, mountains on the other, and somewhere ahead, a task force waiting to be led. An investigation waiting to be launched. A web of corruption waiting to be torn apart, thread by thread. Amber allowed herself a small smile. They had no idea what was coming, but they would learn. They would all learn. Her phone buzzed again, a text this time, from an encrypted number she didn't recognize. 3 installations, same pattern, but there's a 4th one they haven't told you about. When you're ready to know the truth about what really happened to your father, meet me in Annapolis. Come alone. Tell no one. And Raven, don't trust the Commandant. Not completely. Not yet. She read the message twice, then deleted it as trained to do. A 4th installation. A warning about the Commandant. Someone out there who knew things that weren't in any official file, who was willing to share them, but only on their terms. The layers kept multiplying. The mystery kept deepening. And the truth, whatever it was, remained tantalizingly just out of reach. But that was fine. She was patient, she was trained, and she had all the time in the world. Or at least, all the time until whoever was watching decided to make their move. The highway stretched on. The sun continued its climb. And somewhere in the distance, Amber's next chapter waited, full of danger, full of secrets, full of the kind of truth that people killed to protect. She pressed the accelerator slightly, feeling the engine respond. The hunt was on. The road unfurled like a ribbon of possibility, each mile bringing her closer to answers she had spent years seeking. In her rearview mirror, Camp Pendleton dwindled to a speck on the horizon. A place transformed, a community beginning its long process of healing. She thought about Noah Jennings, the young Marine who had watched everything with eyes full of hope and determination. He would become something remarkable, given time and guidance. She could see it in him, the raw material of true leadership, waiting to be shaped by experience and mentorship. She thought about Fiona Bradley, the lieutenant who had spoken up when silence was safer. There would be more officers like her, emerging from the shadows now that the culture had shifted. More voices willing to challenge wrongdoing, more leaders willing to protect the vulnerable. She thought about Silas, the retired sergeant major who had never stopped serving, even after hanging up his uniform. The silent observers, the quiet guardians, the ones who watched and waited and gathered evidence until the moment was right. They were the backbone of what the military could become, if given the chance. And she thought about Levi, her little brother, who had believed in the Corps with his whole heart, who had trusted the system to protect him, who had been betrayed by the very institutions he served. "I won't stop," she said aloud, to the empty car, to the memory of him that lived in her chest. "Not until I find everyone responsible. Not until I understand why. Not until this can never happen to anyone else's brother, anyone else's son, anyone else's Marine." The words settled into the silence like a vow. The Pacific gleamed to her left, endless and patient. The mountains rose to her right, solid and eternal, and the road continued forward, carrying her toward dangers unknown, toward truths buried deep, toward a reckoning that had been 15 years in the making. Behind her, justice served. Before her, justice seeking, and somewhere in the space between, the woman who had spent 6 weeks as invisible, as nothing, as trash. The woman who had proven that the most dangerous predator is the one that looks like prey. The woman called Raven. The miles accumulated. The sun climbed higher. And the story continued, as stories do. Not with endings, but with transformations. Not with conclusions, but with beginnings. She drove on, into whatever came next, carrying her purpose like a flame that nothing could extinguish. The game had changed. The hunt had begun. And the hunters were about to become the hunted.